Welcome back, folks. I'm Professor G, and today during this lecture I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to what I call Islamic theology, or some of the central beliefs, some of the central concepts that define Islam as a religion. And these have historical roots, but a lot of these terms you're probably familiar with because a lot of these terms are used within the media, sometimes correctly, as we'll see, sometimes incorrectly. So some of these ideas may be familiar to you. Nevertheless, I think it is helpful to go through each one of these, so that way you get a correct understanding of what exactly I mean by this. Okay, so the central aspect of Islam is the Shadaab. The Shadaab is the proclamation of Islamic faith. It is, in order to be a Muslim, this is what you have to accept, this is what you have to proclaim publicly. And the Shadaab states this, that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is his messenger. Or sometimes stated that Muhammad is his prophet. So there is no God but God is the central theological claim of Islam. Very reminiscent in Judaism. If you read the book of Exodus, when Moses goes out into the desert and he encounters Yahweh in the burning bush, Yahweh tells him what? Moses asks, well, which God am I speaking to? Who do I have the pleasure of talking to? And Yahweh says, I am that I am. A very similar proclamation here. There is no God but God. Essentially saying that God is beyond any sort of categorization, that God can't be confined, that God can't be boxed in, that it's negative here, right? There is no God but God, meaning that any positive ascription of God, any positive characterization of God is ultimately going to fall short. Because God can't be described in human language, because God is completely beyond, not only beyond human language, but completely beyond human understanding. And so the Muslim proclamation then is that Allah just being another word for, our generic term for God, that there, first of all, it's monotheistic, that there is no other God besides God. Right? So a denial of polytheism, but that God is beyond our understanding, that he is so great, that he is so powerful, that he is beyond anything that we can possibly comprehend, and therefore that all of human existence, all of human reality is dependent upon God for its existence. So this is the characteristic as far as the Muslim view of where humanity stands in relation to God. Humanity is in complete submission to and complete reliance upon God for its existence. Second part, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. That is, Muhammad brings the final and the purest, so to speak, message. Muhammad is correcting the mistakes of previous religions, i.e. Judaism and Christianity, and Muhammad is bringing the final message of God. He is relaying the words of this God. So this is known as the Shadaab, the Muslim proclamation of faith. In order to be a Muslim, you have to believe this. You can't really question this, okay? So, next of all, we move to the Sharia, or Sharia law. Sharia is, you can think of it as, really as Muslim ethics. Now, we've talked about ethics before within a Western context. Ethics are the rules by which we live our lives, the rules by which we govern our lives. And in the West, ethics and religion have typically been separated, right? Religions do contain ethical proclamations, but you don't necessarily have to be religious to be ethical, is typically how we phrase that point. In Islam, however, ethics isn't separated from religion. And furthermore, Islamic ethics encompasses much more than we traditionally think religion encompasses. For example, in Christianity, if you're a Christian, there's no one way you do your taxes or as far as your economic transactions are concerned. Jesus doesn't really have a whole lot to say about that. Jesus is primarily concerned with how we treat our fellow man in a general sense. But Islam is more robust in its ethical approach to human life. Sharia law is the Islamic law which govern our lives, and by govern our lives, I mean every single aspect of our lives, from what we eat to how we dress, to our economic relations with other people, to our business models. Everything falls under Sharia, and Sharia governs the human life from cradle to grave, so to speak. Sharia encompasses everything, not just what we would traditionally consider religion, like prayer, for example, but Sharia also tells us about our diet, what we can eat. Muslims, for example, don't eat pork and they don't drink alcohol. Right? This is Sharia law. It's telling them. And the purpose of Sharia law is not just law for the sake of being restrictive, but it's very similar to what we observe in Judaism, where the law is supposed to set the Jewish people apart. The law is an indication that this is God's chosen people, and that they are different and distinct from the rest of the world. In much the same way, Sharia is what governs the Muslim's life, and the law's purpose is to bring that person, to guide that person to God. That's what it's there for. Okay? Now, jihad is a word that's often mistranslated as holy war. Jihad is typically assumed to be like violent action, specifically violent actions that Muslims take against non-Muslims, and that sort of misses the general meaning of jihad within Islam. Jihad is a struggle. It's the Muslim seeking to abide by and adhere to Sharia. So jihad is simultaneously a personal quest to fulfill Sharia law, to abide by Sharia law, but it's also displayed publicly by the community. And this is where the confusion perhaps comes into play, because jihad is that struggle to maintain Sharia, both in the individual's life, right? I can say that I'm carrying out a jihad in my personal life for maintaining my fast or for maintaining a regular prayer schedule or something along these lines. Where we today typically think of it more as a social thing, the jihad against a particular group of non-Muslim people, and that's certainly a characteristic, one meaning of jihad amongst many, but it's not the full meaning of the term. Okay. So Sharia is Muslim law, which governs every aspect of the Muslim's life, and jihad is the desire to fulfill that law, the individual desire to carry out that law. Now let's talk about the 5 pillars of Islam. The 5 pillars of Islam representing sort of the core of Islamic faith in terms of how it's played out on a daily basis, how an individual Muslim lives his or her Islamic faith. First of all, we have the Shadaab, which is the proclamation that we just got through talking about. It's the central theological claim of the Muslim, and if you're going to be Muslim, you have to accept this. Second is the Salah. The Salah being the ritualistic prayers in Islam. Muslims typically pray about 5 times a day, and this is a commandment. Again, this isn't really optional. That's not to say if you're sick or perhaps if you're going through like a really rough day where you don't necessarily have the time to do it because you're doing something concerning your immediate health health, or perhaps you're helping a family member with something that needs to be done right then. Okay, but it is required, right? If you're just at work or if you're just at the house, then this isn't really optional, right? You're supposed to pray. Prayer is a central component of the daily life of the Muslim. It happens 5 times a day. It's carried out by the individual at home and in private, but it's also carried out as a group. You go to the mosque, for example, on Friday evenings, and you carry out your daily prayers with the community of Muslims, typically accompanied by a reading from the Quran, always in Arabic. Third up, we have the Islamic practice of fasting. Now, within Judaism and Christianity, fasting is typically viewed as optional. It's something that you do if you're trying to have a deeper relationship with God, if you're trying to, perhaps your spiritual life is faltering, so you want to get back on track, and so Jews and Christians will often fast in this way. Fasting for the Muslim is not optional. Again, this is something that you have to do, and this fasting occurs during the month of Ramadan. Now, Ramadan doesn't happen the same time every year because the Islamic calendar is different from our calendar in the West. We operate according to a solar calendar. The hours of our day are determined by the movement of the earth around the sun. The Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar, and so their months aren't always the same each year. So Ramadan falls during a different time each year. This year it was in June, I believe, in June. So for the month of Ramadan, you're required to fast from sun up to sundown. You're allowed to eat after the sun goes down and before the sun comes up. Again, this excludes, for example, women who are pregnant. This excludes children who perhaps aren't able to complete Ramadan because kids need to eat on a regular basis. This excludes the sick or perhaps the elderly. But again, it's expected that even if you can't do it during this time, that you are making up some other time of the year. That it's not an absolute requirement, but it's something that you're highly expected to do. Even if you're not able to carry it out literally during the month of Ramadan, you got to make it up sometime later. And of course, Ramadan ends with the major Muslim feast, the ending of the month of Ramadan. And Ramadan signifies that time of year in which Muhammad began to receive. It's the month of power when Muhammad began to receive the Quran from the angel Gabriel. And so finally, not finally, but fourth of all, we have the Hajj. And the Hajj is a Muslim pilgrimage. It's a journey to what is perhaps the holiest place in all of Islam, ending at the Kaaba. The Kaaba we talked about in the last lecture is that ancient rock, that ancient meteorite, which now has a nice, lovely building built around it. And the Hajj is the trip to Mecca. The Hajj is the pilgrimage to Mecca, and this is a requirement. Muslims are expected to take a Hajj no matter where you live at in the world. You're expected to do this ideally every year, but of course, if your economic situation doesn't permit it, at least once in your lifetime. This is supposed to be a foundational event in the Muslim's life. And again, this corresponds to when Muhammad was kicked out of Mecca. He had to flee to Medina, but he eventually comes back and conquers the city and cleanses the Kaaba. And so you're supposed to take that similar pilgrimage that's supposed to represent a spiritual cleansing of the soul, a forgiveness of sins, the starting of a new life, the building up of a new character. And all of this is signified in the physical pilgrimage itself that's supposed to carry spiritual significance. And finally, we have tithes and offerings. This is similar to what we see in Christianity, for example. If you go to a Christian church and you're sitting there and they're singing the music, and then all of a sudden you see like this bucket or like a plate coming towards you and people are like putting money in it. Similar concept. Muslims are expected to give not only to the mosque or to the Muslim community itself, but they're also required to give to the poor. This is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's not something like, well, okay, maybe we should, volunteer at the homeless shelter once a month or something like this. It's required. If you're going to be a Muslim, you have to give to the poor. You have to help out those in need physically and financially. Okay, so this gives you a general picture. I wanted to be as practical as possible as far as if you encountered a Muslim, maybe some of you are Muslims. Sorry, the fire alarm's going on here. So I'll end the video now so I can make it out of the building alive. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me.